Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA. First, a word from our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors. Founded in 2004, Affiliated Monitors provides professional, independent integrity monitoring and ethics and compliance assessments nationally and internationally and across almost all industries. With its knowledge of effective ethics and compliance programs and cultures, Affiliated Monitor is respected for its work as the corporate monitor on matters ranging from multinational corporations to small and mid-sized companies and even individuals. Having served in over 750 monitorships, no one has more experience as an independent monitor than the team at Affiliated Monitors. For more information on how an independent monitor can help improve your company's ethics and compliance program, visit our sponsor, Affiliated Monitors, at www.affiliatedmonitors.com.
Statute of Limitations, Navex Global and World's Most Ethical Company Research, and the harrowing experience of a French expat with Alstom GE and the FCPA. All this and more this week in FCPA.
This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back again with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, for another week of This Week in FCPA, episode 151 for the week ending April 26, 2019, the World Domination Edition. So, Jay, we're going to discuss, is the U.S. utilizing FCPA enforcement for world domination? As a recovering screenwriter, you may have some thoughts on world domination. As a frustrated novelist, I certainly do. Nevertheless, there was quite a bit of worldly ethics, corruption, and compliance stories this week. So why don't we just jump right into it?
So I think one of the things that is on the country's mind with the Mueller report that got dropped last week is people are wondering about the statute of limitations with regard to President Trump. Can you let us know what Sarah Crope is thinking about on the grand jury target?
Sure. Sarah's always excellent grand jury target blog. She's a white-collar defense practitioner, so kind of speaks to things from that side of the fence. But she goes through and lays out the math for the statute of limitations. And the earliest date that the statute could run, according to her well, first of all, we're talking about obstruction of justice. The statute of limitations for obstruction of justice is 5 years. So the earliest date the statute could run, given Trump started in office in January of 2017, would be January 2022. And the conduct, which may have been obstruction, began when Trump asked then Director James Comey to back off the investigation of Michael Flynn, and that happened in February. So that would be February 2022. The latest date of the conduct described in the Mueller report, January 18, 2019, where Trump publicly accused Michael Cohen's family.
I think you were right crimes. The first time, hump.
The hump. That happened this year. So the statute on that claim would run January 18, 2024. These outcomes could be changed by Congress, although she does note it would be unlikely. If Trump does win the election and serves out his entire second term, he'll no longer be president. So this might obviate all of this. So really interesting article, great for Sarah to lay it out. If you don't subscribe to the grand jury blog, go ahead and do so. It's got a lot of great stuff for the compliance practitioner, once again focusing on Sarah's practice of white-collar defense, but lots of things to know about. So kudos, Sarah.
So next up, I've got a column coming to us from my colleague on Corporate Compliant Insights, Sandra Ares, and she takes a look at a compliance playbook for Operation Varsity Blues, lessons for the compliance practitioner from the college admission scandal. And she takes us back to old Greece with the crowd and the actors and the Greek chorus, and she imagines that we are now in that time, and instead of using text, T-E-X-T, we're using same spelling of text, T-E-X-T, but we are twittering and tweeting to each other. And she talks about, with regard to Varsity Blues, lesson number 1 she pulls from it is history repeats itself ad nauseum. And her compliance takeaway is make sure you have a clear picture of reality in your organization via empirical software solutions that reflect what's going on beneath the surface of your organization. For example, a whistleblowing portal solution or incident management system that is open to everyone in your company to use for submissions. If you can't perceive what is happening because there is no integrated reporting solution, you won't be able to use the lessons and experience of the past to shape the future. Now, lesson 2 that she extracts is mathematics. Irrational numbers can be dangerous. Compliance takeaway, have a code of conduct in place that is staunch and clear enough to defray any attempts at a general lowering of values or ethics because, quote, everyone's doing it, unquote. And her second takeaway here is watch for irrational numbers in every area of the organization and make sure that ruling authorities have someone watching them as well. Irrational ain't irrational for nothing, so get to the root of things. And lesson number 3, comparative literature, tales of woe from ancient Greece to modern Sicily. Her last takeaway is don't wait to implement compliance-related training until you suspect that someone's cooking the books. If training is already implemented, make sure that it is training that is compelling and relevant with real-life examples, not just dry legislation to read and tick the box. Anywhere there is people, there is greed, so at least know your risks and what they will cost you in the end. And as said in the famous Greek tragedy Medea, it's human. We all put self-interest first. So it's a real interesting article. It's a series that Sandra's starting, and we connect to that on the show notes. And next up, Tom, why don't you let us know what Michael McGrath is thinking also in Corporate Compliance Insights about the NYDFS?
So the NYDFS is the New York State Department of Financial Services. It regulates financial institutions, banks, and insurance companies in the state of New York. It is one of the leading state regulators in those areas. And one of the things that's important for people that work in the more general compliance space, Jay, is they're really a cutting edge leader in many areas, different types of compliance. And a couple of years ago, they created the cybersecurity requirements for financial services companies in 2017. And now all of those requirements are fully in place and live, and they went live or required to be in place on April 1 of 2019. So the program around cybersecurity is not anything new. These are the 4 key provisions: written policies and procedures designed to protect users from risks posed by third-party service providers, the identification and risk assessment of third-party service providers, minimum cybersecurity practices required of third parties, the evaluation of third-party cybersecurity practices through due diligence, and the periodic assessment, a risk-based assessment of your third parties. There are also policies and procedures for the third-party service providers, including guidelines for due diligence and contractual protections addressing access controls, encryption, notifications, and reps and warranties. So, excuse me, it's a basic cybersecurity program for your third parties because it's limited to these businesses, financial institutions, and insurance companies in the state of New York. It's somewhat limited, but really every compliance practitioner needs to take a look at it. You need to have a plan in place, and this really gives you a framework to think about how you would set up your cybersecurity program for third parties. So it's good stuff, and it may portend a type of regulation that we could certainly see in the United States.
Next up, we have a piece from our good friend, the coolest guy in compliance, Matt Kelly, over at Radical Compliance. And Matt went on a little bit of a tweet storm this past weekend and put up 15 tweets about the Boeing incident. And I'm going to ask you to chime in a little bit later, Tom, because both you and Matt did an Into the Weeds podcast this week. But Matt is still trying to solve the question about what did Boeing do, and did they basically fumble the football here in terms of their ethical compliance issues. And what we're learning now is there was a package of technology that U.S. airplane companies bought that would allow them to override the technology that caused both the other two foreign airlines planes to crash. And what we learned on is that the two other airlines that suffered the crash did not buy the upgraded technology package. So the question is now, was it Boeing's responsible to is Boeing responsible for providing the same level of safety technologies to all companies, whether or not they want to pay? So it appears that Boeing's poor ethical decision here about the override software created the opportunity for both Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines to make their own poor ethical choices. Now, Tom, how did you and Matt take this conversation on your Into the Weeds?
So it was really a great exploration, Jay, of something that I don't think is talked about as much in the compliance space, which is where is compliance, where are ethical considerations around what you put into products. And if you think about when you and I both got our first cars, disc brakes were not always standard, for instance. There have been other safety enhancements in cars which could have cost you more money. Power steering, power brakes, for instance, always cost more money back when they were non-standard. But here, Boeing made the conscious decision to offer an upgraded safety package for a price uplift. And when you make that conscious decision, there are always going to be companies that choose the lesser expensive option. By doing so, obviously the question is how much did it place those companies who bought the Boeing product, here the 737 MAX airliner, and unfortunately the passengers on those planes at risk? Matt made clear he faulted both Lion Air and Ethiopian Air for buying the basic safety package. Nevertheless, when you make that kind of dichotomy and you make that kind of business decision and you make that kind of offer on a package, there are always going to be people who take the lesser package. And is safety something that should be optional? Clearly, this gives Boeing a level of, from the legal perspective, a level of actual knowledge that something existed which was more safe, and the liability flowing to Boeing will have to be determined by a court. But how do you make that decision? Who do you have those? Discussions with? It became a really interesting philosophical discussion, but it does have real world implications. And it was something that, Jay, I'm not sure as a vendor in the compliance space, we would really counsel the compliance functions we work with or the cultural aspects of corporations we work with to have compliance at the table for those discussions previously. But now it may be something that we need to incorporate into that council.
Yeah, it's just Matt really has a way to getting to the heart of the matters here, and it's a fascinating look. We link to it in the show notes. Next up in our trip around the world for anti-corruption and bribery, we have a piece from BBC News by Henri Astier. And in April of 2013, Frédéric Pierucci stepped off a plane at New York's JFK airport during a routine business trip. He was seized and handcuffed by a uniformed man. Pierucci had authorized bribes to Indonesian officials to secure a contract for boilers at a power plant for the French energy company Alstom. He worked at their subsidiary in Connecticut, and while this was happening, Alstom was in a position that they were being acquired by General Electric. And Henri Astier takes a look of the whole timeline on what happened to Mr. Pierucci, and the conclusion that Henri makes is that basically he sees the FCPA as a cudgel that's being waived by the U.S. government to impact and potentially have negative consequences on our foreign enemies or also foreign allies with France in that nomenclature there. So what we see here is that the French, who looked at Alstom as basically a corporate treasure of the French economy, that they built nuclear power plants and nuclear generating submarines, and they felt with the situation now that they have been acquired by GE, that could kind of take away from their corporate sovereignty. So this is a piece that we don't usually see, because we usually see pro FCPA articles that we read talking about leveling the international playing field. And I just thought this was a fascinating exploration and how the French and other companies, maybe Iran or companies that have had sanction against them, might not have the most positive view of the FCPA.
So, Jay, I also thought this was a very interesting article. It's really a two separate subject article. The first is the individual journey of Periucci and what he went through, and that's quite harrowing. But it goes into detail not only about his dealings with the U.S. government, but how Alstom literally threw him under the bus, and then after they ran over him several times, got out and stomped on him, most particularly his head and his mouth, so that he wouldn't implicate others in Alstom. It shows the dangers of a corporate provided lawyer who takes his or her orders from the corporation who's paying the bill, not their client. Clearly a violation of every state ethical requirement I'm aware of in the United States. So if you find yourself as an individual defendant, you might want to read this article for that reason. The second part of the article is just this unfettered criticism of the FCPA. And here you can only say that the author, one, has an extraordinary hard-on for the FCPA because he completely misreads how it's used, why it's used, but also the specific use of the FCPA in the GE Alstom merger. He's got that particularly wrong as well. But let me start with his view. And every compliance practitioner needs to understand it exactly for the reason you articulated, Jay, that this may be the view of many outside the U.S. and that this is being used unfairly, particularly under the Trump administration, we're America bitch attitude about any country that is not Russia or China or perhaps North Korea. We're going to turn on them at the earliest possible time. But in terms of this case with Alstom, it just belies absolutely the facts on the ground. First of all, Alstom was under potential. First of all, they've been under long-time FCPA investigation. Periucci clearly admitted and freely admitted he had paid bribes, but it said he was ordered to do so. That's where Alstom stomped on his mouth and kept him from talking about the higher-ups in the company who ordered and or approved his bribe payments. But when it came to Alstom itself, the company obfuscated, did not cooperate with the Department of Justice, and did not do so really up until the GE merger, when GE insisted that they do so. Alstom was under consideration for purchase by Siemens and General Electric. The two crown jewels that you talked about, the submarine and nuclear power parts of Alstom, those were not sold to GE. GE bought the power turbine business. And if we can take that a step further, it's been an unmitigated disaster for GE. They have lost hand over fist. It was an idiotic business move by GE. It led to the departure of the now two former CEOs ago, Jeffrey Immelt. And so to claim that the U.S. government was doing this so GE would have the opportunity to buy a money-losing outfit just belies any sort of rational analysis going forward. The United States, it is in the United States government's interest to prosecute bribery and corruption wherever it occurs. And it's certainly in the U.S.'s interest for companies such as General Electric, which by reputation, have best practices compliance programs to take over corrupt organizations and to help move them towards a less corrupt business model. But in terms of GE getting some kind of discount or some kind of positive out of this has just been a business disaster for General Electric. So those facts really belie kind of his entire analysis on that side. But once again, I would certainly agree with your analysis. Everybody needs to read this because you need to read if you're an executive, what can happen to you, because Periucci clearly or delineates the missteps he thinks he made. Two, how the law and how it's applied or viewed overseas. And then three, there's actually some pretty interesting quotes from Dan Kahn, the head of the FCPA unit, and Andy Spalding, professor at University of Richmond, who teaches in the compliance space, that clearly I think refute everything that the reporter puts in here. So a really interesting article and something that I think is going to be, we're going to be talking about it more as this administration weaponizes literally every law it can to punish those that don't kowtow and kiss the ring of Donald Trump?
Well, Tom, I'll give you a second to catch your breath because you're up on the next article. We are into April, almost the beginning of May, and that means we're going to start to see all sorts of research from Q1 and the first half of this year begin to trickle out. The first we have is Navex Global's 2019 Ethics and Compliance Hotline Benchmark Report. That's a mouthful in itself. And we're picking up a story from our good friend Jacqueline Jaeger over at Compliance Week. So, Tom, what are the takeaways from Jacqueline's analysis of the Navex report?
So, as always, a great piece from Jacqueline. And the benchmark report looked at over 2,700 companies who'd received 10 or more reports from during 2018. The key findings that the tracking of all report intake methods had increased significantly. Companies that track only open reports made through their hotline showed 1.1 report through for every 100 employees, and that was literally doubled with companies who tracked it through all other methods, up to 2.1. The message to compliance and ethics officers, at least in Jacqueline's minds, was clear that companies that do not gather reports from intake methods other than hotlines miss a large percentage of risks and concerns employees are bringing to this attention. So what that really means, Jay, is hotline is one part of your reporting system. And it really all involves an ethical culture. It all involves a culture of compliance. And it all involves not only a speak up, but a listen culture. So you've got to train your middle managers to how to be intake sources. You've got to train your local compliance champions. You've got to train your HR people. And of course, as compliance practitioners, you have to be able to accurately and efficiently triage claims to get the important ones to the places they need for investigation, literally up to the board of directors. So some great points on here. She quotes Carrie Penman and others from Navex, a couple of outside counsel, and it's all about trust and lack of trust. So good stuff from Jacqueline as well.
So next up, as promised, we've got some quick little tidbits from the 2019 World's Most Ethical Companies list. This comes to us from Ethisphere when they release their rankings at this time of the year. And the first volume of the 2019 data was obtained from honorary companies to assess their program and create industry benchmark. And here's three quick little things. First of all, diversity seems to be at its highest level. Among the 128 companies from the 2019 awards list, women hold 28% of the director positions, a 4% increase over the last year. This compares with only 21% overall on the large cap index. Next, disseminating information about disciplinary actions. Amazingly, 1 out of every 10 employees surveyed by Ethisphere indicated that they either disagree or strongly disagree that the rules and associated disciplinary actions for unethical behavior or misconduct have been shared with the company. That said, nearly 1/3, 32% of honorees do communicate publicly about such concerns. The last takeaway is about the support for middle management. An employee's immediate manager is the most commonly used resource for not only asking questions, but for also reporting observed instances of misconduct. This article is by Arti Maharaj, and it runs in the FCPA blog, which we've linked to in the show notes. And you can also click there to request the 2019 WME World's Most Ethical Company Report. Last up, Tom, we have an article from Dunstan, Allison Hope in the bsr.org website talking about transparency challenges in CSR.
So another interesting article, and something that is going to become more important as not only social media awareness and the amplification of reputational damage through social media occurs, but we have government sharing information, and that is also moving into the CSR space. And I thought that was a great point, and that, frankly, that's what the author starts out with. He really gives us 3 concepts to think about with transparency in your CSR program. Number 1, awareness, that they reports have substantively raised awareness about complex data sharing relationships between not only governments, but between governments and companies. And this has resulted in higher quality public policy proposals on key human rights issues. Second is advocacy. We see even more advocacy today, Jay, than probably any other time. And these reports from governments and companies have enabled civil organizations and human rights defenders to advocate for yet even more improved. And then, of course, accountability. These reports generated by, once again, both governments and companies have provided a place for companies to explain their processes, to talk about those who didn't meet their standards and may have been sanctioned, may have been terminated, and going forward. So there's really an urgent need for disclosure, but this disclosure of information really has helped, I think, the public, corporations, and governments, all who have a role in the transparency around business and human rights. And as governments step back even more, companies are being forced to take over more and more roles, and certainly in the role of human rights, human slavery, or human trafficking, slavery, et cetera. Businesses are being asked to do more and more. So good stuff to recall.
The conference that you're attending, why don't you tell us about the ECI's Impact 2019 in Dallas next week?
Right. So for those who have the opportunity, and we've linked to the registration in the show notes, the ECI is having their annual event next week, Impact 2019 in Dallas. And it's going to be a great event. ECI is one of the top ethics organizations, and we're really going to have the opportunity to take a look at the benchmarking for ECI's high quality program. And ECI recently rolled out a high quality program assessment tool. You'll have the opportunity to utilize that assessment tool, I believe, at no charge if you attend the conference. And it's a great way for you to assess where your organization is. I'm going to lead a panel on companies, first of all, of compliance practitioners who were part of the team that developed it, because it was designed by compliance practitioners for compliance practitioners. But more importantly, they're going to talk about their experiences within their organization by not only with a high quality program, but the assessment tool. So I think it's certainly something that you would want to attend. Brian Bitkowski is going to be the keynote speaker. There's some really interesting keynotes, one by Amy Edmondson about the fearless organization, creating psychological safety for learning, innovation, and growth. A fellow named Tony Brigman who's going to talk about fun in the workplace. And he comes from Southwest Airlines. Jay, my father was a labor arbitrator and had many arbitrations with Southwest Airlines. And even as contentious as labor arbitration can be, Southwest and their unions and their employees all emphasize the fun nature of working there. And so I'm going to be really interested to see. Lawyers typically don't think about fun as part of your workplace. And then there's a fellow named Sam Silverstein. And Sam, he is a true evangelical on accountability. And so he's going to give a keynote. And I think each one of those in their own unique ways will give the compliance practitioner really interesting and useful information. Your colleague, Eric Feldman, is going to speak. Some of our good friends, David Bunker, Katura Patel, Paige Moats from Dell is going to be there. Pat Nazzo, Philip Winterburn from Conversant, Valerie Charles is going to be there. So it's going to be a great event, and I'm looking forward to meeting people. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the high-quality assessment tool and high-quality program. So I hope you can attend. Once again, we've linked to it in the show notes.
So also later on in May is the annual gathering of the Compliance Week Tribe. Do we have a special for our listeners, Tom?
We do, Jay. I've been given a $300 discount, and we're able to pass that along to any listeners of our podcast. The code is pretty robust. It's Tom300. But if you enter that code, you should get a $300 discount. We've linked to the agenda and registration information in the show notes.
Since it's so hard to crack, does that mean if we put in Tom 1000, we can get a $1,000 discount off?
Well, you could try.
So another timely thing that Tom did this week is he had a 5-part series with our colleagues at Ascent Compliance. Tom, why don't you tell us a little bit about that series?
Sure. Ascent Compliance is one of the, I would say country, but they're a Canadian company. So the hemisphere's leaders in supply chain compliance. Jared Connors, who was my colleague way back when we were both at Red Flag Group, has moved over there. Jared's a CSR expert. And we're going to, or we had rather, a first of a multi-part series with Ascent. So we introduced the topic of supply chain risk management. We talked about who is Ascent. I talked to the general counsel, Travis Miller, about how supply chain risk management and compliance developed. And Jay, in a most interesting podcast, he said it actually went back to the conservation movement in the 19th century. Around the wiping out of the buffalo of carrier pigeons of national park system created by Theodore Roosevelt. That led to the second environmental wave, literally, that Rachel Carson and Silent Spring brought about in the 60s. So I found that a really interesting underlying basis. I didn't know that we could track our spiritual forebears all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt and beyond. And then Jared talked about some compliance failures. And then what are some of the continued market drivers for development? We hit that a little bit when we talked about the article by Dunstan, Allison Hope, but Travis Miller came back and talked about the how multiple stakeholders now have influence on a variety of corporate actions, and those multiple stakeholders could be your employees, could be your board of directors, could be the corporation itself, but it also could be your customers. It could be those on social media or a wide variety of others. And Jay, as you know, we had a Everything Compliance podcast recording go up yesterday, and we were joined by our latest panel member, Sarah Haddon. She's the publisher at Corporate Compliance Insights, and you named our episode the Drinking the Kool-Aid edition, but it was a great podcast, and that went up yesterday. And I hope you will, our listeners will check out Everything Compliance as Sarah's joined us and had some great insights for us, in addition to your montage of Drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We had some great energy, and we look forward to having Sarah be part of the Everything Compliance gang. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this week in FCPA, episode 151 for the week ending April 19th, 2019, the World Domination Edition. Thanks for joining us and have a wonderful weekend.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions for either Jay or myself, you can email Jay at jayrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I hope you can join me next week at ECI, and you can join Jay and I at Compliance Week at the end of May. Once again, link to the discount or use the discount code to get a $300 discount to Compliance Week, courtesy of this podcast. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.